are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Jiggers Place. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every other Thursday afternoon at 5 p.m. Pacific time to have a cocktail and talk about all those things besides finances, the ones that make life worth living, whether it's great books, relationships, ideas, religion, God, all those things. We talk about them here. And today I'm going to be talking about the great detective Sherlock Holmes. So, and also about his creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So I think I've mentioned before how much I enjoy reading mystery and detective novels. Huge fan of Sherlock Holmes, of Agatha Christie, who wrote about, of course, Hercule Poirot, as well as the Miss Marple series. Rex Stout, who writes about the big rotund detective that Sidney Greenstreet plays in the radio show, and I'm going up on his name. Anyway, and so many others. And into the modern day ones, the Dick Francis novels that are all detective stories, although they don't involve an actual detective. It's usually regular people like a banker or somebody involved, and they're all set against the steeplechase racing world, or at least the horse racing world. Sometimes they're set against flat racing, but most Dick Francis was former Queen's jockey, a steeplechase jockey, and so he wrote detective stories with that as the setting. I just reread one of Dick Francis's books, and I don't remember which one it is, but you can read them numerous times and always find something new in them that's wonderful. They're just great entertainment. So, in honor of the great Sherlock Holmes, with my drink assistant, my drink creation assistant, ChatGPT, we created something called the Consulting Dectective. And the Consulting Dectective is a gin-based cocktail. In this case, London Dry Gin, which of course Sherlock Holmes lived at 221B Baker Street in London. I'm using Boodles, mostly because I love the name Boodles, but it's just a all around decent London Dry Gin. And then for Cognac, I'm using Marquis de Brine, and all Cognac is French. It's a brandy that's made in the Cognac region of France, which is why it can be called Cognac. This happens to be a kosher one. There are a number of different kosher cognacs. Obviously, if you don't keep kosher, you don't have to worry about that. Anyone will do. Sweet vermouth, aka Italian vermouth. I'm using just martini, and this is a terrific vermouth. Using some absinthe. This is Lucid. This one happens to carry a kosher certification, although in my estimation, absinthe does not need to have, as long as it's not flavored like any other liquor, it doesn't need to be certified. But Lucid was the first absinthe available in the United States after the ban, which had been in existence for literally decades, I think close to a century, was lifted. And then a couple of different bitters, good old Angostura bitters, and then Bittermens Burlesque bitters. Each is going to add a little bit of a different element. And then if you got the recipe by subscribing to my email list, you saw that you can put a bar spoonful of Benedictine. This is just to add even more depth and layers of flavor to the cocktail. So it's going to be aromatic and herbaceous. It's going to be a stirred cocktail. Normally I do shaken. This is going to be stirred. So I've got my mixing glass here with my ice in it already, and we're going to start out with an ounce of London Dry Gin. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we've got an ounce of that. Oh, and I realized I didn't get a glass. Excuse me one moment while I get a glass. Okay. We're going to use a coupe. The recipe does call for chilling the coupe in advance. I checked the freezer in my bar refrigerator, and I have to defrost that freezer because there's no room in it. So, okay, so next is 3/4 of an ounce of Cognac. Okay, so put that in there. And then we want 1/2 ounce of sweet vermouth. We've talked about this before. There's dry vermouth, otherwise known as French vermouth, and there's sweet vermouth, which is also known as Italian vermouth. And then you also see Bianco, which is it's a kind of in between a sweet and a dry vermouth. Okay, and next 1/4 ounce of absinthe. I love absinthe. I started drinking it before I was deployed to Germany, and then while in Germany, I came upon an entire shop devoted to absinthe, and it turned out the fellow who owned it was one of the top absinthe makers in Europe. He makes Habsburg La Magnifique. Seeing if his name is here, so I don't remember his name now. It's too long ago. I got into absinthe even more and learned a lot more about it. That's one of the fun parts about all this is finding people who, share your interests and finding people who are experts. Okay, so a dash of Angostura bitters and a dash of the Bittermens Burlesque bitters. You can really smell the herbs in this. Okay, and just want to check this here. Oh, and then a bar spoon of the Benedictine. Okay. It's really just to add a little bit of extra flavor, a little extra layer of flavor. Okay, so then we're going to mix it. And of course, just like with shaking, the mixing is not just to chill it, but it's also to dilute some of the ice because the water brings out the flavor. So you want to stir it for a good, 20 to 30 seconds. This way so it doesn't flop out to the spout. A little bit more. You can see the outside of the glass is all fogged up. That's because of the cooling. Okay. And there we go. Take our strainer and strain it into our coupe. This makes just about one, and then you can top it with a star anise if you want to be really creative, or a lemon twist. I'm just going to put a lemon twist. Okay, and let's give this a try. Wow. so many great flavors, but they really work well together. Okay, so I will see you over on the sofa. One second. Okay. What happens is I have a 2-camera setup, and if I can mute the microphone on this camera, but I have to shut off the other camera. But when I come over here, otherwise we get echo feedback. So this is the volume of Sherlock Holmes stories that I have. This is one of the classic, not original works, but it has 37 short stories and a complete novel, The Hound of the Baskervilles, in it. But it also has all of the original Sidney Piaget, I believe his name is, illustrations. So, and you can see some of them. They're really just exquisite ink drawings that he did. I think that they looking to me, I could be wrong. Here's some others. This is from, I think, the Hound of the Baskervilles. I'm not positive, but they're just wonderful, wonderful illustrations. So, if you're real, and I saw that this book is still available on Amazon. Yeah, here it is, with all 356 original illustrations by Sidney Paget or Paget. I don't know whether it's pronounced in French or English. So this is kind of my Sherlock Holmes Bible, if you will. Really hits the spot. Okay, so I'm going to start out talking about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. So he was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, on May 22nd, 1859, into a Roman Catholic family of Irish descent. And there was, in the 19th century and well into the 20th century, there was a lot of conflict between Ireland and England. So that's kind of, Sherlock Holmes is considered the quintessential Englishman. He's not an Irishman, he's an Englishman. And so that's kind of an interesting little fact there, that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was of Irish descent. So Conan Doyle studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh, which is in Scotland, where he met Professor Joseph Bell, who was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. Professor Bell was a professor of medicine. He published his first short story in 1879 called The Mystery of Sasassa Valley while he was still a medical student. And so it's interesting, he was born in 1859. He was a medical student in 1879. He was a medical student when he was 20 years old. Now, you think about that today, right? So, young people go to a 4-year college or university first. So they're usually not even getting done with their 4-year degree, their 4-year bachelor's degree, until they're around 21, 22. In this case, Conan Doyle was already in medical school, probably doesn't have a quote-unquote undergraduate degree. He earned his medical degree in 1885 and practiced medicine in South Sea, England. He created Sherlock Holmes. The first Sherlock Holmes story is A Study in Scarlet. It was published in 1887.
So you can see we're talking about a character that's about 140 years old. He modeled Holmes's detective skills on Professor Bell's diagnostic techniques. So we're going to talk about Sherlock Holmes's techniques a little bit later, but you'll see this must have mirrored how this professor of medicine approached the diagnosis of patients and the treatment of patients. Conan Doyle gained widespread fame with the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, illustrated by Sidney Paget and published in 1892. He attempted to kill off Holmes, sort of, in 1893's The Final Problem, and it prompted a public outcry and a big drop in magazine subscriptions. So the Sherlock Holmes stories were published in the Strand magazine, and people loved the detective stories so much. When they killed him off, they dropped their subscriptions. So he revived Sherlock Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles, perhaps the best known Sherlock Holmes story. It is a novel written in 1901, 1902, and later in The Return of Sherlock Holmes in 1905. So in addition to Sherlock Holmes, he did write novels and science fiction, including The Lost World, and he wrote political pamphlets. So he did other kinds of writing, but really Conan Doyle is far and away best known, of course, for Sherlock Holmes. During the Second Boer War, he served as a war correspondent, the Boers being the South Africans of German descent in, of course, South Africa. And there were a couple of wars between England and the Boers, which England ended up winning, and South Africa became part of the British Empire, and then part of the British Commonwealth, and then eventually an independent nation. He was knighted in 1902 by King Edward VII, not for Sherlock Holmes, right, but for his work supporting Britain in the Boer War. So it's interesting because today you see a lot of writers, performers, musicians who are knighted for, like Elton John. He's Sir Elton John. He was knighted because of the popularity of his music. So even though Conan Doyle had written arguably the most popular detective of all, fictional detective of all time, that's not what he was knighted for. He became a passionate advocate of spiritualism following his son's death in World War I. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was one of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Englanders, Britishers who lost children in World War I. It was a devastating war for England, and really started the decline of the British Empire because of the tremendous loss of manhood. And they were young men who would have eventually grown up and run the British Empire. They just were not there. And then after World War II, of course, that was it. He had a famous public feud with Harry Houdini over the legitimacy of spiritualism. Now, Harry Houdini was, of course, the famous magician, and Houdini was fond of showing that many other magicians were complete charlatans. Houdini was actually more of an illusionist than a magician. And then on July 7th, 1930, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle died of a heart attack at age 71 at the Crown in Crownborough, England. So, he lived for 71 years, and made an enduring contribution to literature. And I would argue not just detective fiction, but his whole approach to how he wrote, I think, has its echoes throughout English literature. Okay, so now Let's look at a biography of Sherlock Holmes himself. Of course, he's fictional, but we do know a lot about him because there are so many, Sherlock Holmes novels, and of course, there's numerous spin-offs. There are several movie series. Basil Rathbone is probably the most famous Sherlock. I'm sorry. Basil Rathbone, the most famous Sherlock Holmes. Although there have been many actors who have portrayed him. Basil Rathbone also portrayed Sherlock Holmes in a radio series, and there have been numerous radio series done based on the Sherlock Holmes stories. So we are talking about a perennial fictional figure in Western culture. Okay, so as I mentioned a few minutes ago, he first appeared in a study in Scarlet. That was the first Sherlock Holmes story in 1887. I mentioned when I was mixing the cocktail, he resides at 221 Baker Street in London. For most of his career with his friend Dr. John Watson, who was a physician and also served in the British Army in India, among other places. Of course, his signal trait is he possesses extraordinary powers of deductive reasoning, observational skills, forensic science knowledge. Nothing got by Sherlock Holmes. Now, he was a consulting detective, so he got involved in cases that other detectives could not solve. That was kind of his thing, right? And oftentimes he would, not oftentimes, but sometimes he would refuse to take a case because it wasn't challenging enough, or regular detectives could handle it. It's thought that he was educated at either Oxford or Cambridge. It's never precisely stated where he studied, but it seems like it was one of those two great universities. He was a master of disguise, and he often adopted other identities as part of his investigations. And I'm remembering I listen to old time radio most mornings, and one of my favorite shows is the Sherlock Holmes old time radio show from I believe it's 30s and early 40s with Basil Rathbone. And there was one in particular where he disguised himself as a sailor, and there's another where he disguises himself as I think a Cockney taxi driver, right? And of course, even Dr. Watson at times is surprised to learn that Sherlock Holmes was there with him, only in disguise. He was skilled in chemistry, anatomy, and logic. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of crime. Knowledge. Why wouldn't it be knowledge? Well, that would be the study of knowledge, right? As opposed to knowledge. He plays the violin, and it's funny how the mind works. So, if you're familiar with the great Stephen Schwartz show 1776, there's a song in it where John Adams and Benjamin Franklin are asking Martha Jefferson why she's so in love with Thomas Jefferson, and they're out on the street in front of where the Jeffersons are staying, and she says, "He plays the violin, he tucks it right under his chin." So whenever I think of he plays the violin, that song comes to mind. I know that's a digression from Sherlock Holmes. Okay, now we're back to our show on Sherlock Holmes. He's known for being aloof and unemotional, but he does have a true and abiding friendship with Dr. Watson, and he cares about him deeply. He struggles with boredom, and at times suffers from ennui. which sometimes led him to indulge in cocaine, a character flaw that Dr. Watson acknowledges. And he clashes at times with Scotland Yard, especially Inspector Lestrade, although we do see that Scotland Yard and Inspector Lestrade respect Sherlock Holmes. They collaborate with him at times. And so it's a love-hate relationship. And again, this is one of the areas, this sort of love-hate relationship. So you see this certainly throughout detective fiction between a private detective and the police. In many others, you see it in Sam Spade. Yeah, you see it in Nero Wolfe. That's the Rex Stout detective I was trying to think of. So Nero Wolfe has a very love-hate relationship with the police. Of course, Nero Wolfe, the great New York detective, New York-based detective, very condescending to the police, but the police grudgingly acknowledge his skill. Okay, and his Sherlock Holmes's number one nemesis is, of course, Professor James Moriarty. You see him showing up in a number of stories, and especially in the radio shows done during World War II, Moriarty shows up undermining the Allied war effort. So, and again, as I mentioned when I was talking about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's biography, he was presumed dead after the Reichenbach Falls duel in The Final Problem, but you know, the outcry was so great, Conan Doyle brought him back. And he occasionally assists the British government, even dabbling in espionage. And that aspect of Sherlock Holmes you see played up quite a bit during World War II in original stories written for the radio show, you know, for Sherlock Holmes. And eventually he retires to the countryside. He keeps bees and writes about his methods. So that is the biography of Sherlock Holmes. If you like herbaceous cocktails, and I do, by the way, this is so good. I have to tell you. I will say that it's probably more of a fall winter cocktail than it is a summer cocktail. And it's interesting because I think of absinthe as being a fall winter anise liquor, and I think of pastis as being a summer liquor. And they're both essentially the same. They're licorice flavored liquor, but somehow pastis, because it's associated with the south of France and the sunshine and all of that, I can't bring myself to drink pastis in the winter. And this is one of the few times I've had absinthe in. I think we're actually in summer now, or no, we're going to be in summer next week. Okay, back to Sherlock Holmes. You know, cocktails and Sherlock Holmes, right? Okay, so here's the history of Sherlock Holmes story. So first appearance 1887 in A Study in Scarlet, published by Beaton's Christmas Annual. In 1890, The Sign of Four appears in Lippincott's magazine, establishing Holmes as a recurring character. Now, at this time, short stories were commonly published in certain magazines. And Lippincott's, for sure, was one of those well-known magazines that published short stories. From 1891 to 1892, he was the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes was serialized in the Strand magazine. dramatically increasing its popularity, and that's what you see here. And then I've already talked a couple of times about the quote unquote death of Holmes in the final problem. 1894 to 1901, public backlash. Fans mourn. They wear black armbands, right? They're so upset that Sherlock Holmes, that they think Sherlock Holmes has died. And so they put pressure on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to revive the detective. 1901 to 1902, he returns via the Hound of the Baskervilles, which is serialized and it's actually set before Holmes' supposed death. And then the serialized novel is subsequently published, as a book. In 1903, Holmes is officially resurrected in The Return of Sherlock Holmes, and it reveals that Holmes survived his fake death. And then in 1915, during World War I, in his last bow, an older Sherlock Holmes helps Britain during the First World War. And then in 1927, the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes is published, and it's the final collection of Sherlock Holmes stories, and it really finalizes the canon of Sherlock Holmes. Now, this book does not have every single story in it, but it's a great starter, and then from there you can fill in the other stories. So total output, excuse me, there were 4 novels and 56 short stories. So this book has 37 of the short stories in one of the novels. So there's 3 more novels and 19 more short stories on Sherlock Holmes that aren't included here. But again, you have lots of Sherlock Holmes in this book. Okay, so now we get to the crux of it, right? You know me. I work to convince you to read 19th century literature. I talk to you about why you should believe in God, why you should treat relationships so importantly. So I'm gonna try and convince you, I'm gonna work to convince, right? Do or don't do. There is no try, right? The wisdom of Yoda. So I'm going to convince you to read Sherlock Holmes. So first of all, despite being set in 19th century, or I should say in Victorian England, Sherlock Holmes is timeless. The battle of the detective against the criminal, mind against mind, right against wrong, these are timeless ideas, plots, and so for that reason alone, they're worth reading. And even if you're not a particular fan of detective fiction, if you're a fan of intellectual stimulation, Sherlock Holmes, he's your man. He's your man. Okay, he's not your guy because he's not a guy. He's your man. Okay, next. If you do like mysteries and detective fiction, his plots are very engaging. So it's the kind of thing that once you start reading a particular story, you're not going to go, oh, I'll finish this later. No, you're going to read it through. Okay. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's writing style, it's very crisp. It's the plots are engaging, but so is the writing itself. And I've talked about this before, the use of language, all of these things, they so enrich us. And reading Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's language will just be a wonderful engagement with the English language. Okay. Next, the relationship between Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson is one of the great duos of all time. It's up there with, Batman and Robin, and Agent 86 and Agent 99, for those who are familiar with Get Smart, with Nero Wolfe, and now I'm going up on his man Friday. But there's Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, they set the standard, especially for a close male relationship, right? And they can at times insult each other. They can love each other, be mortally concerned about each other, support each other without being sappily sentimental. And it shows you that the quality of a relationship that two men can have, it doesn't have to become a sexual relationship in order for it to be deep. So men can have very deep relationships. A man can have a very deep relationship with another man, and without it meaning something else. And I think somehow that idea has been lost over the last half century or so, but it was understood by former generations. Okay. So there's a cultural legacy of Sherlock Holmes, and the setting in Victorian England. All of these things are touchstones for references that redound throughout English literature to this day. And so if there's a foggy night in London town, da 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 da. It's one of the great American songbook songs, right? It's evocative of the kind of scenes that are set in Sherlock Holmes's stories. And in fact, I think much of what we think about when we hear Victorian London, it comes from how Sir Arthur Conan Doyle portrayed London in the Sherlock Holmes stories. In fact, I would say there's two sources for how we think of Victorian England and London specifically, and that is Charles Dickens, and the second is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle through Sherlock Holmes. Or maybe I'm projecting on the rest of the world how I perceive Victorian London, but it's through those lenses. Okay, the obsession with logical thinking is, and we see that today, where people invoke science as a holy writ, right? It has some of its roots in the obsession with fact and deductive reasoning that Sherlock Holmes displays in the 56 short stories and 4 novels about him. And another thing is, if you don't have the patience to read a novel, Sherlock Holmes's short stories are so satisfying, and you can read them in a relatively short period of time. So my older sister Marla is coming to visit starting tomorrow. We haven't seen each other for a while. We were most of the time very, very close, and I'm looking forward to spending the Sabbath with her and talking a lot. But the Sabbath for me is also a time where I indulge in reading. And so I'm going to keep Sherlock Holmes handy so I can read some short stories in between talks and sips of whiskey with my sister. Or I may even try and to see if she'll indulge her younger baby brother. Maybe she'll let me read her one of the Sherlock Holmes's mysteries. In fact, I just had a great idea. I'm gonna see if I can convince her. And you know what? Knowing her for the wonderful woman she is, I bet she will indulge me and let me read a Sherlock Holmes story to her. So the next reason for reading Sherlock Holmes is it is very intellectually satisfying. One of the reasons I loved reading detective stories and listening to detective stories on old time radio is to see if I can figure out, the mystery before it's revealed in the story or in the radio program, or for that matter, in the movie. And it's a way of keeping my brain active, and I think for you too, it's a way of keeping your brain active. Okay, a few more. I've just got a few more here. So, while I've been focusing on Sherlock Holmes, the character of Dr. Watson brings a dimension to the Sherlock Holmes stories without which they really wouldn't have the depth and charm and engagingness, I don't know what the word would be, that they otherwise would have. And that is because for all the cold logic that Sherlock Holmes displays, Dr. Watson is the warm, human, caring element in all of these stories. Though he's warm and human and caring about his great friend Sherlock Holmes, but also about the victims and this is my next reason for reading Sherlock Holmes, about the pursuit and rendering of justice. Okay? There's a moral clarity to Sherlock Holmes where justice will be served. In that sense, it's like the Charles Bronson movies from the 70s where he plays the vigilante, right? So at times, Sherlock Holmes uses extrajudicial means to bring about justice. He doesn't necessarily conform with the law, but when he violates the law, it's to see that justice is served. And I think for all of us who care about a moral world, there's something satisfying about that. I'm just reflecting on today where I've had three major confrontations with just how unjust the world will be, and sometimes how powerless we are to see that justice is served and that morality is maintained. So to be able to read a Sherlock Holmes story and somehow be reassured that maybe, as we say in Judaism, in the next world, we never have to worry, but that justice will be served and morality will be maintained. And so, to enter Sherlock Holmes's world is to enter a world that is morally very pure, even though it's set in the grit and filth of London, and the means of bringing about justice are not always the purest. Okay. And then, you know what? I'm going to end there because I think that if I haven't convinced you at this point, it's probably a lost cause. So one more sip of cocktail. I received just a really lovely compliment from a very long time friend of mine who maybe is listening to the show. She and her husband are regular listeners slash viewers of the show. So Suzanne Geimer and Marty Geimer, they live in Savannah, Georgia now. They used to live here in they lived in Beverly Hills, just up the street from where I am now. And Suzanne, one of the most wonderful compliments I've ever had, she said, I wish you had been my English literature teacher. And there is no higher compliment that someone could pay me that I've helped them learn something. Because in the end, that's what Jiggers' place. That's why you should come here. It's to leave here enriched, imbibed, a little cocktail, but also enriched. And I can assure you that by you watching these shows and giving me feedback, you enrich my life. And I hope that I'm able to do the same thing for you. It's really my, as the French say, raison d'être, my reason for being. In this case, my reason for doing these shows. So this is my last show for this week. We'll pick up again on Sunday with a Way to Wow show on Sunday. Yes, indeed. There's a special edition of the Way to Wow show on Sunday to mark the anniversary of the adoption of the Pledge of Allegiance. So check that out. But I wish you a wonderful rest of the week and a wonderful evening as we head into the rest of Thursday. And signing off, as I always do, Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.